This is LycanhoodReads, and today is actually June 1st. So happy Pride Month to all my gals, pals, and trans folks out there. So like I said, it's June 1st, and I had a really busy, wonderful, but stressful May. May is usually the busiest month of the year for me, other than maybe December, just because my family has a lot going on that month. It's my birthday, my sister's birthday, my parents' anniversary, my girlfriend's anniversary, just a super busy month. It's also summertime, you know, so vacations and whatnot, traveling, the end of school, just a lot going on in May. However, despite the fact that this was an extremely busy May for me, I reached my reading goal for the month, which was 9 books. I didn't read the 9 books that I had planned to read necessarily, but I did still reach my goal, and I'm pretty excited about it. Also, if you caught my May anticipated releases video, you would know that there were a lot of books coming out in May that I was very excited to read. Usually, most of them were continuation of series that I had been waiting for, and I actually managed to read, let's see here, I managed to read 3 out of the 4 on my list. So I'm going to get into that and my whole reads for the month, as well as a little June TBR. My cat Spencer is laying all on my important papers and my reading notebook here. I don't know if he wants to be in the video or if he just doesn't want me to do the video. But he looks quite comfortable. If there's ever a notebook or a laptop, you can guarantee that he's going to be on top of it. I think he's kind of fascinated by my microphone cord. I need these books, buddy. Not a care in the world. Yeah, he likes this microphone cord. That's pretty cute. Maybe we could just do a whole video of Spencer laying on these notebooks, and that would be good enough to be the wrap-up in the TBR. I'd watch it. Spencer. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is the first book that I finished this month was The Providence of Fire, which if you have been paying attention, you would know that's the second book in the Chronicles of the Gideon Throne. So that's a series that I started reading in April, I think, and I just finished it this month. So I read, the first book I finished this month was the second book, A Providence of Fire, and then I finished The Last Mortal Bond as well. And what this is an epic fantasy series, if you didn't know, by Brian Staveley. And I came by it kind of by accident originally, because I was looking for books similar to Kings of the Wild, which I read at the end of last year and loved. And this was just like one of those, you know, recommended, if you liked this, then read this sort of things for Kings of the Wild. Oddly enough, it's not very similar to Kings of the Wild. Like, it's an epic fantasy, but whereas Kings of the Wild is very humorous and sort of like a parody or a satire of D&D, like Dungeons and Dragons, Chronicles of the Gideon Throne is quite serious, and I would put it in the category of like grim dark fantasy, or just sort of bordering that, at least. The first book is called The Emperor's Blades, and the series, it follows 3 siblings, 3 imperial siblings, as right after their father is assassinated, the emperor is assassinated, and it follows them as the 3 of them try to, or have to deal with the consequences of the assassination, have to unravel, like, you know, the plot behind it. It's a lot of political intrigue, a lot of war, a lot of violence, a very, very violent series. I ended up loving it though. The world that Staveley builds is extremely rich, and while it's not, I'm not gonna say it's like completely different from most epic fantasy, like a typical epic fantasy world, it is unique enough to stand out. Like, he has some really cool elements that I just haven't seen before, and the world is so richly drawn that I didn't want to leave it. Like, I got really obsessed with this series, and I kept wanting to dive back in and wanting to dive back in, because even though the world is so dark, it is very well populated by Stavely and well drawn. And to be honest, the series, it's not perfect. The characters I'm not crazy about. I liked the characters, or most of them anyway, but they didn't have the depth that I'm usually looking for in my epic fantasy characters. However, the world was enough to keep drawing me back in and to make me care. It's really cool. A little glance I'll give you is that one of the most elite military forces in this series is called the Ketrol. And they are soldiers that are trained from very young ages, usually around the age of like 10 or 11 they're recruited. And from that point on, they're trained until they're about 19 or 20 to be Ketrol. And the main thing that puts them apart from other soldiers, other than just that really hardcore training from childhood, is that they ride on humongous war hawks, or war birds, or whatever you want to call them. The size of the birds is a little bit unclear to me, but I can tell you that a team of 5 grown adults can easily ride on the talons of these birds. So when I say that they're huge, I mean that they're huge. And so that's those are the weapons of war that the Ketrol use, and that really sets them apart from other warriors in this world. And the Ketrol, the god that they worship and the characters themselves and the whole institution of the Ketrol was one of my favorite things about this series. I won't say too much more than that. It's a lot more than just the Ketrol. That was just one of my favorite elements and something that kind of set it apart. It reminded me a little bit of Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse that came out last year, where there were also giant birds that people rode. I don't know if that's just like a new thing we're excited about, but I definitely loved it in this series. Again, character work's not spectacular, but world building definitely is. The plot was good enough to keep me interested. I wasn't crazy about the ending, but I will say that the ending isn't much of an ending because this is one complete trilogy. However, Stavely is continuing the story within this world in another trilogy that's actually coming out. The first book comes out in July, and that's called The Empire's Ruin. So that's following different characters, but it takes place after this trilogy and within the same world with some of the characters that we met in this trilogy, more minor or side characters. So he still has a lot more story to tell, and I think he's going to continue to explore some of the bigger like mysteries and stuff that he set up in this trilogy. So it's by far, it's not perfect. Definitely not perfect. Probably not for everyone. But I really, really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to see what Stavely does next as far as this trilogy goes, or as far as this world goes, because I would honestly keep coming back to this world again and again. More about that later, because I'm actually reading a standalone that takes place in this world this month in June. It's one of my first reads, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, that's the Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne by Brian Stavely. The first book is The Emperor's Blade, and I'm not going to give it a star rating. Like the whole trilogy, I think I rated the individual books on Goodreads, but I don't really like star ratings because it doesn't let me express all of my thoughts that I had about the series. I'll just tell you guys that I liked it, I really enjoyed it, I recommend it, and I'm going to keep reading books in that world. There you go. Because I hadn't read it yet, and I was just like, oh, well, I need to get on this. I want to know everything I can about the Locked Tomb trilogy, the Locked Tomb world, and so I read that, and that just made me miss Gideon and Harrow and everything. So I picked up Gideon the Night just to look at it, I guess, or to skim through it a little bit, but I ended up rereading the whole thing, which happens sometimes. So I did a reread of Gideon the Night, and that contributed to my monthly goal. I didn't reread Harrow because I just read it back in February, so that was pretty fresh. But I hadn't read Gideon in over a year. And originally I read it on audiobook. And because I read it on audiobook, I don't think I enjoyed it the way that a lot of people did or the way that I wanted to. So this time I reread it on ebook, and I definitely followed along a lot better this time. So if you haven't read Gideon the Night already, I would highly recommend reading it on a physical copy or an ebook before you read the audiobook, or just other than the audiobook. Because I think it's easier to follow with a lot of the names and just sort of the way the story is told. It's just hard to follow on audiobook, even though the narrator for the audiobook, at least the one I read from Audible, did a great job. It's not their fault. I just think it's something to do with the writing style doesn't suit audiobook very well. Because it's just a lot to take in, a lot to keep up with, and it can be confusing at times. A Master of Djinn. I believe the author's name is P. Jelly Clark, is how you say it, with the silent D. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. A Master of Djinn. So this is a full-length epic fantasy. Am I supposed to? Okay, I'm gonna get back to that. It's a fantasy novel, and it has 2 preceding novellas that I have read already. The first one is A Dead Djinn in Cairo, and the other one is The Haunting of Tramcar 105. There, that's all 3 of them. So I'd read the novellas earlier this year in anticipation of A Master of Djinn coming out, and it was one of the first books I read this month, highly anticipated. It was so good. I hope you guys can see this cover because I really love this cover art. It's so incredible. So I stumbled before when I called it epic fantasy because even though I had read the novellas in anticipation of this book, I didn't really know much about the plot, and I didn't really know what to expect. And I thought it was being marketed sort of as like fantasy or like epic fantasy, which it is definitely fantasy. However, it takes place in an alternate Cairo, Egypt, in the early 1900s. I think it's like 1919 or something. No, 1912. And it's got a heavily, it's more urban fantasy really than epic fantasy, or that's the vibe I got. You're following, so it's set up like a lot of urban fantasies are. So you follow Detective Fatima, and she is a detective of supernatural entities. So in this world, Djinn have been reintroduced some hundreds or so years earlier, and they highly affect the technology, the society, the culture of not just Egypt, but the entire world. And so she works for something that's essentially like the FBI of supernatural stuff in Egypt. And you follow a case. So it's a very like urban fantasy setup, and it takes place in a city of Cairo. You can probably tell a little bit by the cover, you also get some steampunky vibes in there. So the book wasn't what I expected. I don't know, I went into it expecting more of a like fantasy vibe, and I don't know why that is, even though I read the novellas, which are very much so case of the week sort of setup. And this was also that way. So I can see P. Jelly Clark continuing this series. I expect they're going to continue it, but I can see them continuing it in a very urban fantasy way. But I did enjoy Master of Djinn. I would say that the case, the mystery of it was a little bit predictable. Like I already knew close to the beginning of it. I was like, oh, that person. Yeah, that person's the bad guy. And I had to wait, towards the end of the book to get confirmation that I was correct. But it being predictable didn't really bother me. Following the beats of the case and really just exploring the richness of this urban fantasy, historical fiction kind of mashup, and the beauty of this Cairo was fantastic. Getting to know the characters. This does have some queer elements. So the main character, Fatima, I don't know if she ever identifies as a lesbian, but she dates women. So there's a female-female romance in this, which is lovely. Her love interest is a trip. She's just an extremely lovable character. I don't want to give away too much more than that, but every time she wasn't on the page, I was looking for her. I was like, where is she? Bring her back. She's also on one of the novellas too. I would highly recommend reading both novellas before you get into this book if you haven't already. They're extremely short, but they are important really in the grand scheme of this novel. I would suggest reading them for sure. So, what more to say? It was a little bit predictable, but I just enjoyed the world. I enjoyed following the characters, the case of the week thing. I really like urban fantasy. It's just something comforting and quick and easy to digest that I can read rather quickly usually, and it's always enjoyable. That's what urban fantasy is to me, and this is definitely what that felt like. I don't know if they were marketing it as urban fantasy, but they definitely should in the future, because I think that would be a selling point, and it kind of describes it to a T, like urban fantasy mixed with steampunk mixed with historical fiction. It's very cool. And I love the magic in this world too. The magical creatures. And Fatma, she's just a human, but it's cool to watch her navigate it all as like an expert. She's got a very Indiana Jones kind of vibe to her. Or Tomb Raider or whatever, something like that, is definitely the vibes I get. And not to mention that she's super hot. So the tarot card sequence that I read over the past couple of months. So the first book in it is The Last Sun, and it's another urban fantasy. I've really been enjoying that vibe lately, by K.D. Edwards. So this series, it consists of 2 full novels and a novella, which is there in the middle. But also, last year during quarantine, K.D. Edwards wrote a series of short scenes and put them all together and posted them on his website. And they're just called Scenes from Quarantine, but it takes place in the world between books 2 and the upcoming book 3. So it was about, I would say after all the comments and stuff, it was about a 30 to 35 page, novelette, I guess is what they were calling it. So I counted it towards my goal, because 35 pages, like, yeah, I've read short stories shorter than that and counted that. So I counted it towards that. That's Scenes from Quarantine by K.D. Edwards, and this is the tarot card sequence. If you haven't read it already, you should. It's so good. It's urban fantasy, it's queer, it's magical, and found family, and fantastic. I really, really fell in love with these books over the last couple months, and I can't wait for the 3rd book to come out. Which is why I sought out the Scenes from Quarantine anyways, just because I miss these characters, and I miss the world that they were in. So I found a way to be in it a little bit longer. I did way more rereading this month than I expected to do. I'm not a huge rereader, I keep saying that, but I guess maybe I'm turning into a bit of a rereader. Anyway, another book that I reread, other than Gideon The Ninth, was Call Down the Hawk, by Maggie Stiver. I've been reading her for like over 10 years, since I was in high school. I still don't know how to say her name, so I apologize for that, Maggie. But I read Call Down the Hawk, reread it. So I read it last year around the same time, around April, when quarantine and everything was happening. I was working, and I read it on audiobook. And so I reread it just to catch up, because it's a bit of a confusing book. If you know anything about it, it's about dreamers. So it's about people that can pull and manifest objects from their dreams into the real world, which is one of the coolest concepts I've ever come across. And of course Maggie Staver thought of it, because she's just a magical individual. But anyway, the books themselves, the Dreamer Trilogy, is a spin-off of the Raven Cycle. However, the Dreamer Trilogy reads like a dream, and I said that to a friend, and I was like, in all the good and bad ways that implies. So it reads like a dream, but it also reads like a nightmare. And parts of it can be a bit confusing, because it'll jump. It's a lot of like emotional thought monologues, and it's a lot of like jumping from one location or one conclusion to another without much explanation, the same way that you might in a dream. And I'm sure she wrote it that way on purpose, and it lends towards the material very, very well. However, it can lead to, or for me at least, it can lead to a bit of confusion. So I reread Call Down the Hawk just to make sure that everything was fresh, and to make sure that I had worked out everything in my head before I read Mr. Impossible. So Mr. Impossible was another release that came out this month, in May, that I was very excited about, that I've been waiting for. It's the sequel to Call Down the Hawk. That cover is so bomb. Oh, I love it. It's good stuff, good stuff. Way better than the first book's cover. They don't quite match, really, but I love this one. So I read this on audiobook. It was towards the wire for May. I actually just finished it on May 31st, yesterday. I think I enjoyed the first book more. This one felt a little bit short. I read it really fast, but it felt shorter, or just short in general. And so if you read the Raven Cycle, then you know that Ronan and Adam are one of the, especially towards the end, they're just one of the core relationships from the book. And when that series was over, all I did was want more Ronan and Adam, more Ronan and Adam. And so when the Dream Trilogy came out, the Dreamer Trilogy, I was like, oh yes, finally I get more of them. I miss them so much. And while Adam is in the first book a little bit, he's in this one even less. Because the books aren't really, this series isn't really about Adam, or it's not about him and Ronan, or it's not about Adam the way that I hoped it would be. It's way more about Ronan and his brothers, and some new characters that are introduced as well, Hennessy and Jordan. And I miss Adam, and I miss Adam and Ronan, and they are apart for most of the first book and for this book as well, because Adam is at Harvard. He went off to college, which isn't a spoiler. You should know that. And we just don't get to see him much. I miss him. And that's what I kept feeling throughout this whole book. I'm like, where's Adam? But, you know, it is what it is. I wasn't crazy about this one. I have a lot of questions and concerns towards the end of it. I'm concerned about Ronan. I just finished it, like I said, so I need to find someone to talk about it with, because I have feelings and thoughts. But I don't know when we'll be getting the third one, probably at least a year, you know, that's how it goes. Maggie Stryver, she tends to write pretty quickly. So hopefully we won't have to wait too long, and I have no idea what's going to happen in the third book, because this one ended with a doozy. The fourth book in the Course of Dragons series by Jen Lyons, which you guys probably know I've been absolutely nuts for since one of my best friends forced me to read the first one. I'm not going to go into the plot and everything, because if you've been watching my videos, you should know by now. But it's an epic fantasy. This is the fourth book that's supposed to be out of 5, I believe. That's what I've heard anyway, is that the series is supposed to have 5 books. This is number 4. So we're coming up on the end there. It came out in May. The cover is amazing. The covers for this series just keep getting better and better. And like Mr. Impossible, this one was down to the wire for my May, to count for my May goal, because I just finished it last night. I spent like 4 hours yesterday afternoon after celebrating Memorial Day or whatever, reading this. It was so good and crazy. That's what the series is. It's good and crazy and weird. But I care so much. So much, you guys. I enjoyed this one a lot more than... Was it my favorite book that I read this month? I think it probably was. Yeah, it was probably my favorite book that I read this month. Followed closely by The Providence of Fire and The Last Bond together. I'm going to put those two together. But it was good. I don't know how the series is going to wrap up, because this one, the way I did no spoilers, but the way this one ended was just so... I don't know. I'm speechless. It left me speechless, you guys. So that's my reading for May. So I read 9 books in May, 3 of which were new. The Blacktongue Thief was my 4th May anticipated release, and I did pre-order it, and I picked it up, and I have it. But of course I didn't get to it. I was way too busy reading all this other stuff. It's an epic fantasy, and it's going on my June TBR. Getting into June. I don't necessarily have like an LGBTQ theme for June. I'm always reading, you know, queer books, as many queer books as I can get my hands on. And I'm very much a mood reader, so I already kind of have what I want to read in mind, and I don't really follow along for whatever the monthly themes are. So I'm gonna read The Blacktongue Thief this month for sure. It's not my first read of June, but I am very excited about it. Basically, a thief and a knight run into each other on the road and team up on an epic journey where goblins hunger for human flesh, krakens hunt in dark waters, and honor is a luxury few can afford. So I just love that idea. It's a female knight and a thief teaming up, and somehow, for some reason, they have to go on this epic adventure together. I'm totally in love with the cover. I would have been sold on the cover by itself, but I'm also a sucker for female knights. Brienne of Tarth, you know, from Game of Thrones sort of deal. That vibe's just all I need, really. I'm also gonna finally, for real this time, I'm gonna read A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, because I think that I'm going to love Becky Chambers. I've read To Be Taught If Fortunate by her, which is a novella, a sci-fi novella. I read that and loved it. I just love the vibe she's giving off, but this is going to be the first full-length novel. It's the first book in the Wayfarer trilogy? I don't know how many books. Wayfarer series. I've heard nothing but good things. I know it's queer. I know it's found family. I know it's a space opera. So I'm totally ready for this. I've had it since Christmas. I haven't read it yet. I don't know why. But this month is the month, I swear. I'm also going to read A Memory Called Empire. So those are both books with queer elements. I know this has some sort of female-female situation to it. It's also a sci-fi, but I think it's like a sci-fi mystery. I know that there is like political intrigue. I imagine there's assassination and some sort of murder mystery plot to go along with it. So I'm going to read this one as well. And then on audiobook, I am going back to the Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne series. So I know I talked about it a lot earlier, but the Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne, that world that Brian Staveley has so far includes 4 books. So there's the original trilogy, Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne, and then there is a standalone book called Skullsworn, which follows a minor character from the first series, and it's a prequel. So it takes place before the original trilogy. It follows a character from the original trilogy that she was with us a good bit, but we don't find out very much about her. She's mysterious that way. But her name's Pierre. I know that she is queer. She's had relationships with men and women, but she doesn't, you know, I don't have a label to put on her. I love the cover. I love the cover for all these books, honestly. And this is a prequel that takes place, I'm not sure how many years before the original series, but in the original series, Pierre she's middle-aged, like in her late 30s, I would say, and this is when she's young, so she's about 19 or 20. And so what Pierre is, she's a Skullsworn assassin, and what Skullsworns are is they worship the god of death. But it's not as scary as it sounds. They just have a reverence and a respect for death. As justice and like mercy and natural in the world. So their religion, that's another part of this world of the Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne that I enjoy, is the religious aspects. Because the pantheon that Brian has created for that world is extensive and strange and different than a lot of other fantasy series I have read. And I really enjoy the way that the people of that world worship and why they worship. And one of my favorite aspects of it was the Skullsworn, because their reverence for death is not about cruelty, but it's about a lack of fear and about nature, and it's very cool. So getting to know more about that world and that religion and this character specifically is very exciting for me. I just started the audiobook this morning. And so the plot, just to sort of, she is to be initiated into the Order of the Skullsworn. She has to kill someone that she loves. However, she has never been in love. So she has to go on this journey to like fall in love with someone in order to murder them, to become a priestess of an Anshel, the god of death. So that just by itself is like heavy, right? So I'm very excited about this. It's not out yet, but on June 10th, the Jasmine Throne by Tasha Shuri comes out. And you guys may know that I'm trying to read one new book a month, one new release a month, all year. I don't know if that's going to hold it later into the year. But it has so far. I've done pretty good. I think I've only missed 2 months. And of course for May, I read 3 new releases. So I could just overcompensate a little bit, and rearrange in that way. But for my new book for June, my new release is the Jasmine Throne. by Tasha Shuri. She is the author of Empire of the Sands, which I have heard a little bit about, and it's tentatively on my TBR, but I don't know when I'll get to it. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be adult epic fantasy or YA. I'm getting a little bit of mixed signals about that. But either way, I'm going to read it. Either way, I'm excited. It's sapphic. It's Indian inspired, and I don't know too much about the plot other than it's about a vengeful princess who is trying to overthrow her treacherous brother, and the woman who is a priestess but also a maidservant to this princess, and the way that they come together to overthrow this guy. So I know that there's a lot of political intrigue. There's like a revolution. I know that there's magic. I'm not sure what kind of magic. I suspect that there'll be gods. I know it's inspired by India, Indian epics, Indian religion, so I'm totally coming for this vibe. Love, love, love the cover. This comes out June 10th, so I've already pre-ordered this. I should get to it this month since it's coming out pretty early in the month. I'm not sure what order I'm going to be reading these books in, but I'll probably just read this one, you know, directly after I finish whatever book I'm reading on June 10th. So that one's coming out, and then also on audiobook, I plan to read The Cost of Knowing. So I had originally thought that this book was about a gay black teen. However, he's not gay. I discovered that when I was researching for this video. Not gay. Sorry, I guess the cover just gave me some gay vibes and I was wrong. Anyway, heterosexual, but I'm still gonna read it because the cover looks amazing and I really like the concept. So this is like, what'd you call it? It's like a YA magical realism or YA, I don't know. So it's contemporary, but this guy, this high schooler, every time he touches something, he gets a glimpse of the future of that object or of something involving that object. So that's the small like magical bit to it. The rest of it is contemporary as far as I can tell. So it's just a sprinkle of magic. And one of the visions that he gets is a death premonition for his younger brother. So I assume that the majority of the book is dealing with the feelings of that and also trying to prevent his brother's death if it's even possible. To prevent his visions once he sees them. So I think this concept is incredible, and I love this cover, and so I'm excited to get into that one. It's going to be on audiobook this month. So that is my TBR for June. I'm not going to push myself this month because I did so well in May, and because I have some catching up to do with the Blacktongue Thief, and I also want to read the Jasmine Throne. So those are two new releases that I definitely want to get in, and I don't want to otherwise burden myself. But that's my TBR. That's my wrap up. I hope you guys have an awesome Pride Month. I don't know if I'll make another video this month. Hopefully I will. Maybe I'll make a little like, read these gay books sort of video, which would be appropriate. But I hope you guys have a fantastic month. I hope you're living your best lives, and I'll see you soon.